Welcome back to the Clear Admit MBA Admissions Podcast. I'm Graham Richmond, and this is your Wiretaps podcast for Monday, March 9th, 2020. I am joined by Alex Brown. Alex, how are things going?
Very good, Graham. Thank you.
You're surviving the coronavirus, and I mean, you're in a remote corner of the United Kingdom, so I guess you're safe.
Yes. Yeah. No. Where I am, I'm very fortunate. Yeah, we're in good shape.
Yeah, clearly, actually that's a great segue because I wanted to talk about it, the coronavirus and its impact on, what's going on in the MBA admissions world, because I think it's impacting, candidates. And you mentioned to me before we jumped on air to record that there's some schools that have made pretty drastic changes to their kind of admissions assessment process for round two.
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is a huge challenge for schools all around the world and for candidates all around the world that are potentially traveling for interviews and just traveling to visit schools and so forth. So certainly one example that we're seeing on Livewire is a long discussion on Sloan and its interview process for round two. It appears at this point that Sloan is now switching all of its interviews to Skype-based or online-based interviews rather than in-person interviews, which is a big change for Sloan. And I know at least one of the Sloan admissions officers, who I won't name, is a friend of mine, is in location for interviews in Asia, and they decided yesterday, I guess, that they're going to switch even those over to Skype. So these are very challenging times. The sort of uncertainty of the virus and various other things. It's become very challenging, both I think for the AdCom side of it and for the for the student side of it, because oftentimes students will have planned to visit the campus for their interview to learn more about the program and to do some other stuff whilst they're interviewing, and that opportunity looks like it's sliding away for a number of candidates. So yeah, very challenging, Graham, and I don't think Sloan's the only school doing this. I think I saw something about NYU Stern. I'm not entirely sure, but I imagine it's the same for a lot of other schools too.
Yeah, I think schools are increasingly, they're moving stuff to virtual, and I think the issue is going to be, I actually, on some levels, what Sloan is doing makes sense, because if, they're going to make everything virtual to sort of level the field in some respects. Because now I know there's some candidates who I think were sort of mentioning on Livewire that, hey, I had a ticket, I was going to go to Boston and have an interview, and now it's online. And so there's some grumbling about that. And it's a challenging situation. I mean, I know I've talked to a number of schools who have had to alter their outreach. I mean, there are schools that literally, are not going to certain markets and this is the beginning of like the next cycle of recruiting in some instances. And, QS, which is a tour operator, canceled some of their events in Italy. I think we're going to see more and more of this, and it's really challenging. And I just, I urge people to, stay calm and, it sounds like stay home and do these interviews online. And, we're actually, we're releasing, and actually by the time this airs, it should be out there. We have a really good set of tips on how to approach, kind of the online virtual, the sort of the interview when you have to use Skype or Zoom or whatever it is, because it is a whole different undertaking. So we'll get into that on the site. People can check out the admissions tip we're going to share in that regard. But this is challenging, and I do feel for those who have had travel plans altered and we're really hoping to get to a campus.
Yeah, I mean, it is challenging, and yeah, we feel for both the candidates and for the AdCom side of it too. The other interesting aspect is going to be sort of in the short to medium term, the consequences, because at the end of round two, all the top schools will be hosting their biggest admissions events and receptions to try to sort of yield the candidates that they've selected. So it'll be interesting to see if in fact those events go ahead, Graham. If things sort of go as people project, one would assume that those types of events will probably not occur. The other thing to consider is, how schools are going to be using their wait lists and their deferral policy, again, as travel challenges present themselves over the course of the next 2 or 3 months. So, the uncertainty that goes with this virus is clearly going to have some ramifications for this year's classes, I would imagine, Graham.
Yeah, and I guess off the record, I was speaking with an admissions dean the other day who was basically saying that, wow, our admit weekend is our biggest kind of sell, right? That's when they yield in everybody at those events. And this admissions dean was concerned about, how am I going to bring in a class if I don't have some of the usual tools of persuasion at my disposal, right? And I think it's hard. Yeah. So this is hitting. I've talked to or had kind of online dialogue with folks from ESMT and Cambridge and Duke, and I mean, all these schools are feeling the pain. IMD, the schools have been weighing in, telling me that, they're altering their travel, that it's really challenging. So we feel for everyone that's impacted by this.
We'll try to keep on top of what we're hearing too, so that we can keep reporting back, whether it's on Livewire or, further episodes of Wiretaps, because I do think the uncertainty creates a lot of anxiety in the applicant pool. And quite frankly, it's going to be creating a lot of anxiety on the AdCom side too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, so stay tuned. And we did run an article on the site about, the impact of coronavirus and this strain of it, where we talked about some of the discussions happening in Livewire, but also conversations we'd had with schools. So you can check that out because it's also impacted like GMAT testing, GRE testing. So that's an article that's up on the site already. The other thing that I just wanted to mention is that we're getting into decision season, right? I mean, people are interviewing, and we just talked about the challenges of interviewing online instead of in person, but aren't we coming up on some of the big, I mean, we're in March, and a lot of these schools are going to start issuing their decisions. Is there anything that is coming this week or in the very near term?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, Graham, I forgot to look at my calendar just before we came online, which I usually do, but I think Tuck is one of the early ones out the gate. And that might well be this week. Last week we heard from Keenan Flagler and also Tepper, and lots of activity on Livewire from candidates that received the good news from those schools. Very excited. But this upcoming week there's one or two schools, but then the crunch really hits. Towards
the floodgates open.
Yeah, the last couple of weeks of March, it is March Madness in terms of all the top schools releasing their decisions.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Always love the kind of the chaos of that.
Yeah. Did you get my basketball reference? That's quite good for a break.
Yeah, that's true. I was, and that actually got me thinking if I missed like the time to fill out a bracket, or maybe I think it hasn't started just yet, but it's definitely coming. So the last thing I wanted to mention before we do, kind of our usual review of some, wire entries is that we released a podcast last week called Real Humans of Stanford. And this is literally our first attempt at taking the very popular Real Humans article series that we do on the site. We profile current students. We've been profiling alums recently who are at top companies and have gone to top schools. And that's just been so successful that we decided to take a stab at bringing that format into the podcast. So I had the chance to sit down with two current Stanford GSB students. They were wonderful, and they just afforded me so much time and kind of getting to know them and having this discussion about why they got an MBA, why Stanford, how they got into Stanford, what advice they have, and what it's like there, right? So definitely encouraged those of you who haven't seen that podcast come across or haven't had a chance, just give it a listen and let us know what you think. Please leave reviews because we're going to do more of them based on whether, people listen to it, right? So keep us posted. We're always open to feedback, but I had a blast talking to these students, and I'm hoping that, that people listening will enjoy that. We do continue to roll out more of those Real Human stories. We're still in our kind of alumni phase where we're doing, all these top MBA grads who are working at places. I think we put one up on the site today. Somebody's at Apple, and we've done, every company that you could think of that we see over and over again in our Wiretaps posts where people are, indicating their targets. So stay tuned to that. And we do need reviews. Like, I think this is the second week in a row that I'm mentioning that, people need to rate and review this podcast. It really helps us with our sponsors and just in kind of introducing other people to this podcast. So please write a review, rate the podcast, spread the word. I know we've got a lot of listeners over on Spotify and via Apple podcasts. So please spread the word. We love having seeing the numbers roll in of those of you who are listening. So Alex, anything else that you wanted to share? I mean, maybe you want to brag about how many likes you have, or talk a little bit about what's happening in the community on that front with the stars and all that stuff that we've introduced.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously I enjoy seeing what's being discussed on Livewire, DecisionWire, ApplyWire each day, seeing the number of likes go up for the different community members. So it is really fascinating, actually. I'm a bit of a online community geek anyway. But yeah, no, some really interesting discussion. But I think right now some of the discussion anyway is centered on the impact of coronavirus and how it's impacting interview schedules and various other things. So, but yeah, it is. I encourage listeners to head over there if they're interested in those types of conversation.
Yeah, and I did want to give a shout out. We now have like 6 or 7 people who are, MBA applicants who take part in the community who have a star next to their username, which is, everyone has these anonymous usernames, but the star indicates that person has received 30 or more likes for comments that they've posted. So a very good indication that they're offering good advice and feedback. And we even have 1 2-star person. Now, what do you have to do to get 2 stars? How many likes do you have to have for that?
60.
60. Okay.
We're getting a couple more getting close to it too. So it is really cool.
Yeah. So that's exciting. Yeah. Fun to see. So before we dive in, our podcast sponsor is the evening and weekend program at the Kellogg School of Management. We really thank Kellogg for all of their support. We could not do this podcast without them. And I wanted to remind our listeners that, you can reach your highest career goals while earning an MBA part-time. And the evening and weekend MBA program at the Kellogg School of Management is located in their downtown Chicago campus. They offer flexible study options to fit your lifestyle and match your experience. By graduation, you share the exact same toolkit, skills, and network as the school's most prominent alumni. So head on over to kellogg.northwestern.edu/EW to learn more. So thanks to Kellogg, and let's move in. You've picked, what did you pick this week? You have a couple of ApplyWire entries and 1 DecisionWire entry that we're going to discuss. So let's start with ApplyWire, and this is Wiretap's candidate number 1. So this person is looking to start business school in the fall of 2021. They are applying to Columbia, Duke, HEC, ESA, Michigan, Kellogg, NYU, and Darden. They have been working in the oil and gas sector and are hoping to transition over into technology and have listed companies like Apple, Google, and Microsoft. GMAT score is 750. The GPA is a 4, I presume 4.0, like a perfect GPA. We'll have to find out more about that. Years of work experience, 6. They're located in India and would love to end up in the US, Canada, or Western Europe post-MBA. They have been working, I guess you've had some back and forth with this person, but it sounds like they actually worked in like the Defense Department, or kind of state-owned stuff in India as like a scientist, right? And they even did some kind of military, military-related stuff, and then kind of transitioned into a state-owned oil marketing company, and have been doing that for about 3 years. So, yeah. So what was the dialogue you had with this candidate, and what do you think some of the challenges are that they're going to face?
I mean, I think this candidate's probably done some very good work. And has 6 years of work experience, and I think done quite well and had a good level of impact in the various roles that they've had in the oil and gas industry, like you say, on the government side, in defense side, and so on and so forth. They have great numbers, right? So you got a 750 GMAT. It says GPA is 4, so I assume they did very well in school. So that side of it is very good. So what I would say is the ingredient is here for what would be, you would assume to be a strong candidate in in the process. My little bit of concern, Graham, is making sure that they articulate their story and their progression and so on and so forth very well, and make for a cogent sort of plan for their post-MBA goals and make real good sense of them. My fear is that they could be labelled or pigeonholed as a candidate that's simply looking to get out of what they're doing, get into something that sounds really interesting and sexy, and doesn't care where in the world it is as long as it's not where they are now. Which, sounds a little abrupt, but, that's what can go through the mind of AdCom as they're reading stuff like this. If again, their story's not well developed, their rationale for their post-MBA career is not well developed, and so on and so forth. Right now, they say technology and undecided, even though they list, obviously top technology companies. So that's that. I think, again, some really good ingredient here. My concern is the story, making sure that they don't get labelled as just someone that's seeking to get out of what they're currently doing and using the MBA to relocate geographically.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I for me, I just couldn't find the thread. So they've done a lot of different things work-wise, and even in their, kind of community and volunteering, they have a lot going on, but it wasn't woven into a kind of coherent story for me. And I was worried that I actually mentioned in a comment on this post that I was thinking, gee, if they have this expertise in oil and gas, isn't there a way to parlay that into, some kind of a role stateside or in Canada that relates to the energy sector? I mean, there's a lot happening in that sector in North America. And it just, I just sort of felt like to abandon that and just say, I want to go to tech and I'm going to try to work at Apple, Google, or Microsoft. I was a little nervous about that, and absolutely agree that given the, immigration challenges and this idea that are they just getting the degree to kind of get out of India and into Western Europe or the US, Canada, right? So, but I think they have the numbers. And so all that the good news here is that what they really need to do is work on the story and weave it together. And so it should be doable. I mean, I think they have a wide range of schools on their list. I think personally, it'd probably be useful for them to figure out, do they want a 1-year MBA or a 2-year? Do they really, it'd be helpful for them to maybe pick a target like North America versus Europe. I mean, that might make their life a little bit easier because they have a long list of schools here for now. And
frankly, Graham, I don't blame someone that wants to transition from a developing economy to a developed economy. I mean, that's absolutely understandable, but frankly, you don't want to make that come across as being the only reason why you're getting this MBA, and you're flexible in terms of outcome, post MBA career outcome and so forth. Have a really good plan for the MBA. Is always good advice, regardless of whomever you are, and so forth. The other thing is, frankly, you really do want to get into the first round. As again, you can get labelled as coming from an overrepresented population, overrepresented in the MBA admissions pool. So that definitely helps to get the applications in the first round. The other piece of advice, or that I provided on ApplyWire directly, was whether the candidate has within his or her network other MBAs, other resources that can help them develop their candidacy. Give them feedback on their essays and so on and so forth. So it wasn't clear to me if that is the case. Hopefully they can find someone to really provide them some good feedback directly on their essays. Yeah, agreed. And I would say 2 final points on this one before we move on. One is I would be curious to know where they went to undergrad, because, if they went to one of the IITs and have perfect grades and a high GMAT, that'll make them even more compelling of a candidate, because some of the schools in India are really well regarded, right, internationally. So that's one thing. The second thing I was thinking of is just that, having something you said made me think of it, is that they may very well have to go back to India after doing the MBA. And so having a plan that doesn't restrict them to only landing in Western Europe or North America would be smart. And I recognize that doesn't have to be their goal,
But if they're interested in, the energy sector, laying out a plan that's sort of like, here's where I'd love to work in North America or Europe, do, with these types of companies, but I also, could return or go back to India and work with, this energy company that I've had a lot of contact with, or so that it seems like they're not going to be restricted. And yeah, like you're saying, like the school won't have to worry about, oh gosh, what if this person's dreams are unrealistic and we can't really meet them? Yeah. So just keeping that in mind would be smart.
And in that regard, it might be worth looking at potentially consulting type roles, where they're a bit more transient in terms of where a large consulting firm can place their hires.
Yeah, fair point. All right, so let's move on and talk about Wiretaps candidate number 2. So this person also hoping to start in the fall of 2021. They're applying to HEC, IMD, INSEAD, and LBS. And I actually should say that it's possible that they would start in January with some of those programs, right? Because I believe IMD is only a January start, and some of the INSEAD has a couple of intakes, so it depends, right? But in any event, 2021 is their year. They are a managing partner in a family business currently, and post MBA they're hoping to get into tech. They're not 100% sure on that, but the companies they listed are Amazon, Apple, Google, Tesla. GMAT score is 710. GPA they list as 2.5. Years of experience, 12. This person is also located in India, and post MBA would love to end up in London or the UAE. And they mention, they readily admit that they are above average in age. They're 33. And they also have more work experience, 12 years, than typical candidates. They also recognize that they are coming from an overrepresented pool as an Indian male, although non-IT. And they've had, somewhat limited social impact, and, I guess they mean kind of outside activities and community work and stuff. So you had some dialogue, and we both kind of weighed in on this person. I think, what's your take? I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I mean, this person obviously is a little bit of an outlier in a couple of regards. The work experience is longer, so 12 years. The challenge there is, again, as an AdCom, I'm looking at that thinking, this guy may be smart, may be accomplished, and so on and so forth, but maybe coming to this MBA in a very transactional sense. They just here to learn some stuff, to network, and then move on to their next job, rather than truly get involved in the MBA experience. Which a more younger candidate, I'm thinking, wow, they're going to be so enthusiastic. They're going to be doing so many different things, organising clubs, club activity, leadership treks, and various other things. So they're going to really need to show that they're going to be someone that's really going to get involved in the MBA experience. At each of the schools that they're applying. So hopefully they can do that. And, obviously working family-owned business, small-scale family-owned business, that can be very interesting, just making sure that there's a good level of impact there in the family-owned business. And I think they articulated that they can demonstrate that through sort of, enabling, the top line of the business and various other things. So that's very good that they're able to do that. Again, really making sure that the transition to the post-MBA goals makes sense. So my fear here is, yet again, the candidate has, for post-MBA career, has selected technology and undecided, which oddly enough is exactly the same as the previous candidate we talked about, listing some of the same companies. So, the fear is, again, they're looking to get out of the family business situation and are not yet sure what they're planning to do moving forward. So really developing that post-MBA pathway before getting to business school. One, it's going to make for a stronger candidate in the application process. But there's a reason why AdCom like to see this, right? So if you go into the MBA with a good focus in terms of what you're planning to get out of the MBA and what you're planning to do directly after the MBA, you're going to get more out of that MBA experience. And ADCOM want people in their MBA program that are there to get the most out of their experience. So just to explain why it's important to have some cogent set of goals. And this is more so, again, for someone that has 12 years of experience, you think they really should have a very good understanding of how this MBA is going to take them to the next level. So hopefully that comes across. The final point, Graham, for this particular candidate is looking at their GPA, making sure that they listed 2.5. They said they struggled trying to figure out what this GPA is. Well, it's not a US-based GPA. So are there things like class rank or other relative measures that can show us how well the candidate did in academically? Now, they also have their GMAT score is 710. It's a decent GMAT score. We know that. And quite frankly, European schools are a little less stressed about getting the absolute super highest GMAT score, I think, is fair to say. But I would say, again, based on the back and forth we've had with this candidate on ApplyWire, that if they have time to squeeze a few extra points out of that GMAT, which they say they have, and they think they can improve it by 20 or 30 points, because when they took the test, there was some family issues going on that distracted them, then absolutely retake the test if they have time to do it. Anyway, that's my long-winded answer for this candidate. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I just really worry about the target schools. You look at LBS, INSEAD, IMD, HEC. These are some of the best schools in Europe, and this person's, well over the kind of typical age range and well below on the GPA. Unfortunately, with older candidates, sometimes, things like academic preparedness are really scrutinized, right? Because they've been out of school for so long that there's this fear that they won't be able to survive. So as you correctly point out, boosting the GMAT would be great. The thing something that jumped to my mind, they mentioned at the outset, they're not interested in an executive MBA, which I find interesting just because, you have all kinds of flavors of program out there. I mean, even LBS has this great Sloan Fellows program, which is a master's in strategic management or something, right? That's quite well renowned. Most people he would be on the lower end of work experience for that. Many people have 15 or even 18 years of experience there. And, there are a lot of these schools that have excellent executive MBA offerings. And in some cases, the degree doesn't say EMBA. It's just an MBA from the school. It's just all about how the format for it, right? With that said, I understand the desire to do a kind of immersive, full-time, traditional MBA. And I would say, if he can boost, he or she, I guess, I don't know if he said that male or female. He said male. So if he can boost his GMAT, explain the GPA. I actually don't recommend that people convert. If this is an Indian undergrad that's on the 100% scale and this person has a 75%, that's fine. People, the schools know how to interpret the Indian kind of grading system, and will rarely force you to sort of translate it. So I think that's something to remember as well. It would be helpful to know more about this person's work experience. They listed a bunch of milestones, but they were kind of in the kind of we don't have the context. I don't know what kind of a business it is, and so it'd be helpful to know that, because I personally cannot gauge the likelihood that this person will make the leap to an Amazon or Apple or Google without knowing a lot more about their prior work experience. And so that's something to think about. I did mention in my comments that this person may want to cast a wider net and look at some additional schools in Europe or in the UK if they want to end up in London that could be a great fit and could actually provide them with all that they need to make a transition. And so I mentioned that, although the person said, hey, if I can't go to the best, I just may not go. And so I that's fine. They can state that, and I appreciate the candor. So, but my initial thought was, maybe, some of these schools on the list could be fine, right? But I think adding another school or two could make sense. I see a lot of people doing interesting things out of ESMT in Berlin. I see people going to places like Cass or Cranfield or other schools in the UK that are helping them in really effective ways. So anyway, that's my take on this candidate. Anything else, or should we move on to our final wiretaps person?
No, we have 45 seconds to do the final candidate, and then we're done.
Oh no, we're up against the deadline here. All right, yeah, Alex and I are trying to keep these a little bit shorter because we read that people like kind of 30 minutes, but we'll give this decision wire entry our our full attention. So this is Wiretap's candidate number 3. So this person cannot decide where to go to business school. They've been admitted to Cornell, Johnson, and to the Tuck School at Dartmouth. They applied to, obviously, Johnson and Tuck, but also to MIT and Kellogg. And it turns out that both MIT and Kellogg have waitlisted them. They're starting business school this coming fall. They want to work in tech. The companies they list are Amazon, Apple, Google, and Microsoft. They had a 730 on the GMAT and a 3.79. So they, and they actually did share some additional information. So they got into Tuck in the first round without scholarship, although they're on a, quote, scholarship wait list. No money from Tuck, and they're on a scholarship wait list at Cornell, which admitted them in round 2. So as of now, money isn't really playing any role. It's not like they have $100,000 from one school or the other. And they're also on these wait lists. And your advice, if I remember correctly, was that they should push for the wait lists. What else did you have to say about this person and where they should go?
Yeah, honestly, I mean, they have some great options. I guess we should theme this week's wiretaps is all candidates all looking at technology, right? They're all technology definitely is one of the main industries people go to business school for. And it's growing in its importance. This person has a strong GMAT, 730, 379 GPA. I assume decent work experience, although we don't know that. Quite frankly, they have good options now. I would argue maybe Tuck slightly over Cornell. I know you have a counterpoint to that. I'll let you talk to that in a minute, Graham. And really push for the waitlist because, again, as horrifying the current situation is with coronavirus, it definitely could increase the likelihood of some movements off wait lists, especially with candidates that can really show that they absolutely, one, committed to go to the school off the wait list, and two, have the mobility in order to do that, given the current sort of travel restrictions going on around the world, or potential for future travel restrictions, I should say. I don't know. Obviously, this candidate might be based in Boston or on the East Coast, but they might be in another part of the world. I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, really push for the wait list was my initial reaction. And this was sort of followed up. There's 3 or 4 other candidates, a couple of them with 1 stars actually, so they're obviously good community members, sort of reinforcing the idea that maybe at the end of the day, if they can get off the wait list at Sloan, that would be the preferred choice. Kellogg potentially just behind that, but I'll turn it back to you, Graham.
Yeah, so this is an interesting case. I mean, first of all, they're fortunate to have gotten into Cornell and Tuck. These are both great schools, and so even though it's a gut-wrenching decision to make, and being on the wait list at Kellogg and Sloan, at least they have all this stuff in play. So that's the good news. Yeah, the bad news, they probably have to put a deposit down at either Cornell or Tuck while they wait and see how the wait lists play out at Kellogg and Sloan. And I would agree with the community here that both Kellogg and Sloan have a leg up on tech placements, and I think also a leg up on ranking, right? So it's the combination of those two that make them both very appealing. Many people think of MIT as a real ground zero for tech stuff, right? So that school's clearly on the list here, and they should be fighting their way to get in. And I agree with you, there might be more movement there on the wait list than we've seen in years past. But in the meantime, if they have to deposit and pick between the 2 schools that have admitted them, the community seems to be saying Tuck, and I agree that Tuck tends to be a school that ranks more highly. And, if you'd asked me this question like 10 years ago, it would have been even more black and white, because I think, Cornell's been coming up in the world, and Tuck's been kind of facing some struggles, it seems, at least in some of the rankings and such. I still think both of these campuses, having been to both, I love them both. It's such a great setting for an MBA to be in a kind of small town or, kind of a more rural environment to learn. So I think you can't go wrong with either of these schools. The one wrinkle that I mentioned to you before we went on air is that, in recent years, Cornell has come online with their tech MBA that's offered out of New York City, and I think is giving them obviously really great connections into the tech world, and is clearly, has to be having a beneficial, kind of impact on the traditional MBA and the school's kind of career services and their relationships with tech companies. So there is that aspect. I mean, I think, the thing that's unfortunate is sometimes these are easier arguments to make because there's lots of money involved, right? So you're like, oh, Cornell's giving you a scholarship, take the money, but it's hard because there doesn't seem like there's much in the way of money at this point. And, you could go either way. I do think that the one thing I will say is that it does make sense to fight for the waitlist spots. Those are both quote M7 schools, and just trying to get one of those to convert would be terrific. I don't want to tell this person where to go. I think obviously to the extent that they have had a chance to spend time in Ithaca and in Hanover and get to know the two campuses and the student bodies, that would be helpful. And I think they could probably ask some good questions of the career services offices at both schools about placement at the companies that they're targeting. So yeah, that's kind of my take.
Yeah, there's no doubt either option that they currently have will enable them access to the types of careers they're seeking. So a lot of their success will be dependent upon their own individual sort of credentials and so on and so forth. But yeah, at the end of the day, it is possible that there's going to be more movement on the wait list as a result of, the coronavirus issues and so on and so forth. That might play into the hands of some of these folks on the wait list.
Yeah, well said. So we are now, we're a few minutes over our allotted time, but hopefully listeners have stayed with us for all these insights on a tough decision between Tuck and Johnson. But thanks, Alex, once again for picking out these entries, and thanks to everyone who's tuned in. Hope that everyone's staying healthy and navigating, online interviews or whatever challenges are coming your way. And yeah, stay tuned. We'll be back with more episodes, and Alex and I will continue to report regardless of any outbreaks. We'll be on air next week with another episode. So thanks once again, and we'll see you in a week, Alex.
Yeah, best of luck, everybody.